It happened on a Sunday morning. St. Anne's Church was packed. The pews filled shoulder to shoulder, sunlight dripping through stained glass windows. Families stood in pressed clothes, children fidgeting, old women clutching rosaries. All had come to witness what no one expected. Their bishop, standing before the altar, face hard, eyes dark with frustration. At the center of it all rested the relic. It was small, no larger than a folded hand, but it carried the weight of generations. Sealed in a glass case edged with bronze vines, the relic was believed to be a fragment of the Virgin Mary's veil, a strip of pale cloth no thicker than a ribbon. Time had yellowed it, but under candlelight it gleamed faintly, as though the fabric still remembered the one who once wore it. For 70 years it had stood at the front of the church. Parishioners prayed before it, touched the case with trembling fingers, and whispered their griefs and hopes into the silence around it. People said it carried a power of protection. Crops had flourished in bad seasons. Storms had shifted. Families said their sick children had recovered after a vigil by its side. It was not just a relic. It was a promise. And now the bishop meant to destroy it. Bishop Rourke was not a cruel man, but in that moment he looked it. For months he had warned that the people of St. Anne's were turning their prayers too much toward the relic and not enough toward God. He had called it dangerous, a distraction, even idolatry. Few listened. Now, in front of everyone, he slammed his palm on the glass case. His voice cracked through the church like thunder. "This ends today!" Gasps shot through the pews. Mothers pulled children close. Elderly men shook their heads, eyes wide. The bishop's hands trembled as he lifted the case from the altar and set it down on the marble floor. He unclasped the lock, tore back the bronze frame, and lifted the veil fragment with his bare hands. His knuckles were white, his lips a thin line of anger and fear. He raised the relic high, and for one suspended moment, the church was silent. Every eye followed the strip of cloth, glowing faintly in the shaft of sunlight spilling through the window. Then, with a shout, the bishop tore it. The sound was sharper than anyone expected, not the soft rip of fabric, but a crack, like dry wood snapping. Pieces fluttered to the floor, pale against the dark stone. Children began to cry. Women covered their mouths. An old man fell to his knees, tears spilling down his face. And then, something impossible happened. The air shifted. A fragrance rose from the torn fabric. Roses, strong and sudden, filling every corner of the church. The scent was so rich it made people gasp. Some pressed hands to their faces, weeping without knowing why. The candles at the altar flared, their flames stretching tall and bright. Yet none burned out. The sunlight deepened, bending through the glass to bathe the broken relic in golden light. And in the silence, a faint sound swelled. It was not the choir. They had fallen mute, their sheet music hanging limp in their hands. It was not the organ, its pipes cold and still. It was singing, low, distant, like voices carried on the wind. No words, only harmony, pure and sorrowful, echoing through the stones of the church. Men who had not cried in years found tears streaming down their cheeks. Children, restless minutes before, now stared in awe, mouths open. The bishop froze, the torn cloth trembling in his hands. His face, once furious, now drained of color. When the final note faded, the church fell into stunned silence. No one moved. The air still smelled of roses, thick and sweet, clinging to every surface. The bishop bent, gathered the fragments of cloth, and stuffed them into a wooden box. He shut it with shaking hands, refusing to meet the eyes of the congregation. Half the church left in silence, their steps slow, their faces wet. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered of miracle, of punishment, of sorrow. The other half stayed behind, kneeling, staring at the empty reliquary on the altar. It seemed wrong, obscene, for it to stand empty. Mothers pressed their hands to it, weeping. Teenagers folded their arms, trying to hide the tremble in their lips. Old women clutched their rosaries so hard the beads cut into their palms. By evening, the story spread. Some said the bishop was right, that the relic had become an idol. Others said he had cursed the town, breaking a vow older than any of them remembered. But all agreed on one thing. Something had happened in St. Anne's that morning. Something no one could explain. At Tony's diner that night, whispers cut through the clatter of dishes. They say the whole church smelled of roses. I heard the candles bent toward it like wind. My sister swears she heard voices. Angels, maybe. Some shook their heads, muttering it was mass hysteria. Others sat quiet, staring into black coffee, haunted by what they'd seen. By the next morning, the relic's fragments were locked in the bishop's residence, but even sealed away, rumors grew. The box, some said, glowed faintly at night. One housekeeper claimed she heard faint weeping from inside. The relic had been destroyed, but its story had only just begun. No one in St. Anne's agreed on the same story of how the relic first arrived. Some said it came from Europe, carried by immigrants who brought only what their faith could hold. Others swore it was a gift from a missionary priest, sent home with nothing but the clothes on his back and a strip of cloth he claimed was holy. A few insisted it was tied to a vow, a promise whispered long before the church itself was built. Whatever its beginning, one thing never changed. The relic was never just cloth. It was survival, carved into memory. The oldest tale stretched back to 1918, when the Great War was ending and Spanish flu was sweeping the country. The town was smaller then, little more than a cluster of brick homes, a general store, and a chapel with wooden walls that creaked in the wind. Families were losing children by the week. The cemetery filled so quickly that men dug graves by lantern light. Panic spread. Fear hung heavy in the air. It was then, the story went, that Father Callahan, the parish priest, stood before his people with a small velvet box. Inside was the relic. A thin strip of pale cloth, no bigger than a handkerchief, said to be part of the Virgin's veil. Where he got it, no one truly knew. Some whispered it had come from Rome, smuggled home by a soldier. Others said it was given to Callahan by a bishop in Ireland who made him swear to guard it. Callahan never explained. He only told his parishioners, "This is our promise. If she saves us, we will never let it leave this town." That night, the relic was placed on the chapel altar. Families lit candles around it. Mothers brought their sick children to kneel. The flu did not vanish, but it slowed. Deaths dropped. Families that expected to lose everything found their children waking, color returning to their cheeks. People spoke of a shift in the air, a calm they had not felt in months. From then on, the relic was no longer a secret. It became the heart of the town. By the time the new stone church of St. Anne's was built in 1934, the relic had already been set in its bronze reliquary. A group of families carried it together, walking through the streets with candles while the bell tolled above them. They set it at the front of the new altar, sealing it into the place where it would remain for nearly a century. What few people knew was that before it was sealed, Father Callahan slipped a folded note into the reliquary. It was found decades later when restorers inspected the bronze frame. The words, written in faded ink, were simple. "If you save our children, we will keep you here forever." It was a vow, as binding as stone. Over the years, stories wrapped themselves around the relic like ivy. During the flood of '37, when the river rose so high, boats floated down Main Street. The water stopped short of the church steps. People swore the current bent, splitting as if guided away. In the summer drought of '52, when fields cracked and corn shriveled, rain fell only on the town's farmland. Farmers left baskets of the first harvest at the relic's feet, whispering thanks. In 1964, when a coal mine collapsed, trapping a dozen men underground, every wife and child gathered in the church to pray before the veil. Hours later, rescuers pulled all 12 out alive, battered but breathing. The men swore they heard a woman's voice in the dark, calm and steady, telling them to wait for help. No one could explain these things. No one tried. They only knew that somehow the relic was woven into the survival of St. Anne's. By the time Bishop Rourke arrived in the parish, the relic had become more than a tradition. It was part of life. Newlyweds touched the glass case after their vows. Mothers pressed their newborns' tiny hands against it. Teenagers, restless and half-doubting, still found themselves pausing to glance at it whenever they passed. For 70 years, the people of St. Anne's carried their joys and griefs to that small strip of cloth. So when the bishop tore it, it was not only fabric that broke. It was history. It was promise. That night, the fragments of the relic lay sealed in a wooden box in the bishop's residence. He locked it himself, setting it on a shelf in his private study. But word spread faster than locks could hold it back. A housekeeper swore that when she walked past the study door, she smelled roses so strong it made her dizzy. Another servant claimed she heard faint weeping inside, soft but steady, like a mother grieving her child. By morning, the rumors had reached the entire town. Some dismissed them as nonsense, but others said the relic wasn't gone. It was restless. When the story broke beyond the town, it caught the attention of Daniel Price, a young journalist for the Courier-Ledger. He was known for chasing strange tales, haunted barns that turned out to be raccoons, miracle healings that were nothing but old wives' tales. But something about St. Anne's felt different. Maybe it was the eyewitness reports, the sheer number of people who had seen the destruction. Maybe it was the detail of roses, repeated again and again by dozens of voices who swore they hadn't spoken to each other. Daniel arrived in town with his notebook and his camera, expecting to write another piece debunking small-town superstition. What he found was something else. He spoke to parishioners one by one, to Mrs. Kearney, who swore her son's fever broke after she prayed before the relic, to James Murphy, who remembered the drought and the sudden rain, to Father Brennan, retired now, who said he once saw the cloth glow faintly in candlelight when no one else was watching. Every story was different. Yet every story pointed in the same direction. The relic had been a living part of the town's history. Daniel wrote down every word, his skepticism steady. But something gnawed at him. These people did not sound like fools. They did not beg him to believe. They only warned him, quietly, "Don't mock her. Respect what you don't understand." 2 nights later, Daniel convinced a church official to let him see the relic's fragments. The wooden box was plain, unmarked, resting on a table in the bishop's study. When the lid was lifted, the torn cloth inside looked lifeless, just pale scraps, curled at the edges. But as Daniel leaned closer, one fragment seemed to shimmer faintly. He touched the edge with his fingertip. It was warm. Not warm like cloth held in the hand, but warm like living skin. He pulled back quickly, his breath sharp. The fragment lay still, pale and torn. The shimmer was gone. Yet the warmth lingered on his hand long after he left the room. Sunday came again. The pews of St. Anne's were filled beyond their limits. People stood in the aisles. Children balanced on laps. Old men leaned against the walls. They had all heard the rumors. The scent of roses, the glow of fragments, the journalists' questions. And now they had come for one thing: to see for themselves what would happen next. At the front, Bishop Rourke stood stiff in his vestments. His face was pale, lined by sleepless nights. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages of the missal. He had not expected so many to return. He had not expected their eyes, fixed and restless, to pierce him with quiet questions he could not answer. Behind him, on a small wooden table, sat the box. Inside, sealed and silent, were the fragments of the Virgin's veil. From the first hymn, something felt different. The air was heavy, not hot, but thick, as if every breath carried weight. The choir sang softly, their voices uncertain. Children who normally wriggled sat still, their eyes drawn to the altar. Even Daniel, the journalist, felt the hairs on his arms rise as he scribbled in his notebook. When the bishop began to speak, his voice echoed strangely, not loud, but deeper, as though carried by something larger than the stone walls. And then it began. As the congregation prayed, a fragrance filled the air, not faint, not imagined, strong, sweet, roses, the same scent from the moment the relic was destroyed, now rolling through the church until it clung to every pew, every coat, every handkerchief. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers pressed their faces into children's hair. Old women clutched rosaries tighter, tears spilling without control. The candles on the altar flared. Their flames stretched tall, bending forward as though bowing. None went out, none smoked. They burned with a steady, unnatural glow. The bishop froze, his lips trembling, but still he pressed on with the Mass, voice unsteady, eyes darting toward the box. Then came the sound. It was not the choir. They had fallen silent, their voices stilled by fear and awe. It was not the organ. Its pipes remained untouched. It was singing, soft at first, so faint some thought it was their imagination. But it grew clearer. Harmonies layered, voices rising like waves. Not in English, not in Latin, not in any language the people knew. Yet every heart understood it. It was sorrow and comfort and love, all woven together. And it was coming from the altar. The box began to glow. At first it was faint, a shimmer like moonlight across wood. Then stronger until the seams lit golden, as though something within was alive. The bishop stumbled back, his hands shaking. Parishioners cried out. Some fell to their knees. Others covered their faces, unable to look. Daniel dropped his notebook, the pen rolling under the pew. He lifted his camera, but for the first time in his career, he could not bring himself to press the shutter. The moment felt too heavy, too sacred to capture on film. Suddenly, the box shook. A soft hum vibrated through the church floor. And then, without being touched, the lid cracked open. Inside, the fragments of cloth were no longer torn. They were whole, as if the tear had never happened. Pale, shining, the strip of veil lay folded neatly, glowing with a light that was not fire and not sun. Gasps turned into sobs. An old man clutched his chest, not from pain, but from something he could not explain. Children buried their faces against their mothers, crying without knowing why. Even the bishop wept, his tears falling freely down his cheeks. Then, as quickly as it came, it ended. The light dimmed, the singing faded, the scent of roses thinned into nothing. The cloth lay still, pale and ordinary once more. But the silence that followed was like no silence before, not empty, not hollow, but full. Heavy with what everyone had seen, what no one could deny. No one clapped. No one cheered. They only wept. The Mass ended without dismissal. The bishop spoke no final words. People filed out slowly, heads bowed, tears drying on their faces. In the days that followed, nothing official was said. The diocese issued no statement. The bishop avoided questions. The relic remained locked away, untouched, hidden from the world. But the town remembered. Parishioners returned in greater numbers than before. They came not to see the box, not even to see the cloth, but to sit in the church, to light candles, to breathe in the silence that had once held voices not of this earth. Daniel stayed longer than planned. His articles shifted from sharp skepticism to something softer, almost reverent. He did not write of miracles. He wrote of people, of tears, of a silence that could not be explained. Years later, St. Anne's was still a small church in a small town. But every pew was filled, every candle lit. Visitors came quietly, sometimes from far away. They did not find a glowing relic. They did not hear singing. But many said the same thing, that if you sat long enough, in the hush of the old stone church, You could almost smell roses. You could almost hear a faint hum, softer than the wind. And maybe that was the miracle. Not that a relic was destroyed and restored, but that a broken promise was mended with tears.